In September 2024, Japan triggered a trade war they cannot win. They blacklisted 110 Chinese tech firms, thinking they'd slow down Beijing's chip revolution. China's response? A silent economic weapon that could paralyze Toyota, Honda, and Japan's entire industrial heartland within months. This is the story of how sanctions backfired spectacularly. Act 1. The escalation. Tokyo's gamble began quietly, but the implications were earth-shattering. January 2024 marked the beginning of what would become one of the most consequential technology conflicts of the decade. Japan's Ministry of Economy announced sweeping restrictions on semiconductor exports, advanced lithography equipment, quantum computing technologies, and specialized cooling systems for chip fabrication. Officials in Tokyo claimed these measures applied universally to all countries outside the Wassenaar Arrangement, an international arms control pact. But honestly, the timing revealed everything you needed to know about the real target. That very same month, Washington updated its own semiconductor export framework, introducing fresh constraints on cutting-edge AI processors and advanced computing chips. The parallel timing wasn't coincidental, it was coordinated. Western allies were building a technological wall around China, brick by brick. By September, Japan abandoned any pretense of neutrality. Tokyo directly named 110 Chinese corporations on its restricted entities roster. These weren't random companies. They represented the core of China's technological ambitions: lithography specialists, artificial intelligence research labs, quantum computing pioneers. The United States mirrored this move by adding 23 additional Chinese firms to its blacklist, 13 of which operated in the semiconductor and integrated circuit sectors. The synchronization was unmistakable. This wasn't independent policy. This was alliance warfare. But here's the question nobody in Tokyo seemed to ask. Why would Japan risk so much? The answer lies in a painful truth that Japanese policymakers can't escape. Japan used to own the semiconductor world. Throughout the 1980s and into the mid-1990s, Japanese corporations, Toshiba, Hitachi, NEC, controlled more than half the global chip market. Walk into any electronics store in New York, London, or Sydney during that era, and you'd find Japanese semiconductors powering everything from computers to cars to consumer gadgets. Then the new millennium arrived, and everything changed. South Korea's Samsung surged ahead. Taiwan's TSMC revolutionized chip manufacturing. Japanese foundries, once dominant, began falling behind. Today, not a single Japanese semiconductor manufacturer can mass-produce chips at the 7-nanometer node. Not one. Meanwhile, China's SMIC Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation has successfully completed trial runs of 7-nanometer chip samples, surpassing Japan's current manufacturing capabilities. Tokyo attempted a comeback. They poured resources into Rapidus, a national semiconductor initiative backed by roughly $21.6 billion in government and private investment. The goal? Producing chips at the 2-nanometer process node, matching the cutting edge of global technology. But there's a catch. Rapidus relies heavily on IBM's proprietary technologies, and pilot production isn't projected to begin until 2028. That timeline puts Japan a full 5 years behind TSMC and Samsung. The decline didn't just hurt Japan's chip foundries. It devastated downstream industries that depend on semiconductors and advanced materials. Consider 6-inch silicon carbide wafers, critical components in electric vehicles and power electronics. Before 2020, Japanese manufacturers dominated this market. A single wafer commanded approximately $1,300. Then Chinese competitors achieved mass production and slashed prices to around $800 per wafer, a reduction of roughly 40%. Japanese producer Rome was forced to cut its prices to about $900 just to remain competitive, sacrificing profit margins to hold on to market share. Another example. Low-voltage MOSFET chips rated under 100 volts, produced by Japan's JS Foundry. These components are essential in everyday appliances: air conditioners, refrigerators, washing machines. Previously, these chips cost around 40,000 yen per 1,000 units. When Chinese manufacturers entered the market with identical specifications, prices collapsed to 18,000 yen, a staggering 55% reduction. The price war destroyed JS Foundry's order book, leading to bankruptcy in 2023. Japanese policymakers watch this pattern repeat across multiple sectors. Advanced materials, electronic components, precision instruments. Unless they intervened, Chinese technological advancement threatened to consume what remained of Japan's semiconductor ecosystem. So Tokyo imposed the strictest export controls among all Western allies. Tougher than Washington, more comprehensive than Brussels. But in their rush to contain China, Japanese officials overlooked something fundamental. You cannot win a resource war when you control no resources. Act 2. The dependency trap. Japan's Achilles heel isn't technology, it's geology. Japan's rare earth mineral reserves are virtually non-existent. The Japanese archipelago simply doesn't contain significant deposits of the specialized elements that power modern electronics. Historically, roughly 90% of Japan's rare earth supply originated from Chinese mines and processing facilities. Even in 2024, after years of aggressive diversification efforts, Japan imported over 8,300 tons of rare earth minerals. More than 5,000 tons, exceeding 60%, still came from China. This dependency isn't a bug in Japan's industrial strategy. It's a structural feature baked into decades of supply chain development. Rare earth elements aren't actually rare in the Earth's crust. They're called rare because economically viable deposits are scarce, and extracting them is environmentally destructive and economically intensive. China controls this market not because it has a monopoly on deposits, but because it built the processing infrastructure that nobody else wanted to invest in, and accepted the environmental costs that other nations refused. Since China began tightening rare earth export regulations this year, Tokyo has been scrambling. Japan partnered with Washington to secure alternative supplies through joint investment programs. They expanded cooperation agreements with Australia and India, funding new mining and processing projects. Yet despite these frantic efforts, the combined total processing capacity of all Japan's alternative suppliers remains less than 1/10 of China's output. Think about that. Less than 10%. In November 2024, Beijing unveiled the economic weapon Japan couldn't defend against. China's Ministry of Commerce announced comprehensive new controls over rare earth mineral exports. Effective immediately, any company worldwide using Chinese-sourced rare earths to manufacture semiconductors at the 14-nanometer node or below would need explicit approval from Beijing. Not a tariff, not an export tax. Approval, case-by-case permission. The policy specifically targets 5 critical rare earth elements: holmium, erbium, thulium, europium, and ytterbium. These aren't household names, but they're irreplaceable in advanced manufacturing. The controls extend beyond raw minerals to processed forms: metals, alloys, powders, compounds. Most devastatingly, the regulations apply to any product containing even 0.1% Chinese rare earth content by weight. Companies like TSMC, ASML, Intel, and Nvidia must now seek Beijing's blessing to access materials essential to their production processes. This mirrors the semiconductor export controls Washington imposed on China in 2022, but arguably exceeds them in scope and precision. The American restrictions focused on finished products, advanced chips, and manufacturing equipment. China's response targets the raw materials that make those products possible in the first place. The brilliance of China's approach lies in its legal structure. Rather than imposing outright bans, which could be challenged under World Trade Organization rules, China requires approval. This framework gives Beijing unprecedented flexibility to reward cooperative nations while applying pressure on adversaries. It's economically surgical and legally defensible. Global companies had less than 30 days to establish compliance procedures. The scramble sent shockwaves through supply chains from Silicon Valley to Seoul to Stuttgart. Japan also invested in recycling technologies, attempting to reclaim rare earths from discarded electronics and end-of-life automotive components. Recycling helps at the margins. It cannot compensate for large-scale industrial demand. If China imposes deeper export restrictions, and Beijing has already signaled this possibility, Japan's most critical industries will face existential consequences. The automotive sector stands most vulnerable. Producing a single electric vehicle requires between 2 and 3 kilograms of neodymium iron boron magnets. These magnets are essential for electric motors. Their performance depends heavily on dysprosium, a rare earth element that improves high-temperature stability. Without reliable access to dysprosium, the permanent magnets in EV motors degrade rapidly, reducing efficiency and vehicle range. Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Japan's automotive giants, all depend on rare earth supply chains that ultimately trace back to China. If Beijing tightens the tap further, Japan's automakers face a nightmare scenario: production slowdowns, supply shortages, and strategic dependency on a geopolitical rival. Act 3. The Huawei Revolution. While Japan imposed sanctions, China was building something revolutionary. Let's shift focus for a moment, because what's happening with Huawei really illustrates exactly why America's technological warfare strategy failed, and why Japan's approach, honestly, may fail even harder. Back in 2019, the United States attempted to destroy Huawei. Washington placed the company on the entity list, banning it from accessing Google services, Qualcomm chips, Intel processors, and NVIDIA GPUs. The goal was simple: kill Huawei's ability to compete in smartphones and enterprise technology. It backfired spectacularly. On May 19, 2025, Huawei unveiled the MateBook Fold Ultimate Design, an 18-inch foldable tablet that doesn't run Windows or Android. When fully unfolded, you're looking at a massive 18-inch display with 3.3K resolution, delivering 3,296 by 2,472 pixels. Fold it down, and it becomes a compact 13-inch tablet. Fully opened, this device measures just 7.3 millimeters thick, thinner than most smartphones on the market today. It weighs only 1.16 kilograms, lighter than many traditional 13-inch laptops. Pricing starts at 23,999 yuan, roughly $3,328 for the 32GB RAM and 1TB storage configuration. The 2TB version costs 26,999 yuan, approximately $3,744. The display utilizes a dual-layer LTPO OLED panel that reaches 1,600 nits of peak brightness, delivers a 2,000,000:1 contrast ratio, and supports the P3 wide color gamut. Huawei claims this dual-layer structure reduces power consumption by 30%, while tripling screen lifespan compared to conventional OLED panels. The hinge mechanism spans 285 millimeters, the industry's largest. It provides a 400% increase in hovering torque and a 100% increase in load-bearing capacity compared to previous designs. This device maintains stable angles from 30 to 150 degrees and holds position even when opening and closing at angles as low as 0 to 20 degrees. Inside, a 74.69 watt-hour battery, 2 USB-C ports, 6 speakers, 4 microphones, an 8-megapixel front camera, Bluetooth 5.2, and dual-band Wi-Fi. The included wireless keyboard measures just 5 millimeters thin with 1.5 millimeters of key travel, weighs only 290 grams, and lasts up to 24 days on a single charge. It magnetically attaches to the device's back panel. But honestly, none of these specs matter if you miss the bigger picture. This device runs Harmony OS Next, and that's where the real revolution begins. Harmony OS Next is not based on Android. Previous versions of Harmony OS used Android open-source project code as a foundation. Harmony OS Next is completely independent, built from scratch with its own microkernel architecture, its own application framework, and zero support for Android apps. When Huawei launched Harmony OS Next in October 2024 with the Mate 70 smartphone series, the ecosystem started with only 10,000 applications. By January 2025, that number grew to 20,000 apps. As of November 2025, Harmony OS Next supports over 300,000 applications and services. That's 30 times growth in just 14 months. The ecosystem now has over 8 million registered developers actively building for the platform. Richard Yu, chairman of Huawei's Consumer Business Group, stated in an interview with CCTV that Harmony OS will reach parity with Android and iOS by the end of 2025. He claimed the company compressed a decade of foreign operating system development into a single year. Every major Chinese technology company has fully committed. Baidu, Tencent with WeChat, Alibaba with Alipay, JD.com, Meituan, TikTok, known as Douyin in China, they're all in. The Chinese government is actively encouraging Harmony OS adoption through procurement policies and regulatory incentives. You announced that Huawei aims for 1/3 of the global smartphone operating system market share. In Q1 of 2024, Harmony OS captured 17% of China's smartphone market, overtaking iOS, which held 16%. In Q1 of 2025, Huawei and Xiaomi tied for leadership in China with 19% market share each, while Apple dropped to 15%. Globally, Harmony OS reached 5% market share as of Q1 2025, making it the third most popular mobile operating system worldwide, behind Android at approximately 76 to 80% and iOS at 19%. The app experience isn't perfect yet. The Harmony OS version of WeChat is missing nearly 30 features compared to Android and iOS versions, including the ability to share real-time location and recognize text in images. Apps like Meituan and Bilibili also lack some functionality. Some users reported issues with upgrades in October 2025, with certain features breaking after updates. But here's what makes this different from every other Android alternative that tried and failed. Huawei isn't just building an operating system. They're constructing a complete technological ecosystem. Hardware, software, and chips, all developed in-house. The MateBook Fold is powered by Huawei's Kirin X90 chipset, a 100% Chinese-manufactured ARM processor. This connects to their broader strategy with Nearlink technology, a wireless standard that's 6 times faster than Bluetooth, offers 600 meters of range compared to Bluetooth's 10 to 100 meters, delivers just 1 millisecond of latency versus 20 to 40 milliseconds for Bluetooth, and consumes 60% less power. Nearlink supports 256 devices simultaneously and features gesture-based file sharing. You can transfer files with just a wave of your hand. Over 300 companies collaborated on Nearlink development, and partners like BYD are testing it for automotive integration. On the semiconductor side, Huawei's Ascend AI chips are built without American technology. They've outperformed NVIDIA's GB200 in certain workloads by using 5 times more chips to compensate for individual chip performance gaps, essentially winning through scale and system architecture rather than brute transistor performance. Huawei uses SMIC's 7-nanometer process with older DUV equipment, circumventing EUV lithography restrictions. They're expected to produce 600,000 Ascend chips in 2026, roughly double the 2025 production level. Huawei invested in over 60 semiconductor companies through Hubble Technology Investment, creating a comprehensive China-first supply chain. They're working on 3-nanometer carbon-based chips with gate-all-around architecture targeted for 2026. They developed the MindSpore software platform for AI applications, competing directly with TensorFlow and PyTorch. This is what American sanctions created. When the U.S. government placed Huawei on the Entity List in 2019 and banned them from using Google services, Qualcomm chips, and NVIDIA GPUs, the goal was to kill the company. Instead, those restrictions forced Huawei to stop depending on American technology and build everything themselves. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang recently called the U.S. chip bans a failure. He said those restrictions pushed companies like Huawei to achieve independence and build their own technology ecosystems. NVIDIA's share of the Chinese market dropped from 95% to just 50% between 2020 and 2024. That's a 45% market share loss in 4 years. Huawei's success with the Mate X-T, the world's first trifold smartphone launched in September 2024, with a 10.2-inch display, received over 3 million pre-orders in China before its official release. Now with the MateBook Fold, they're proving the same foldable concept works at tablet scale. Samsung's competing Galaxy Z Fold is priced between $2,500 and $3,000, but Samsung is struggling. Their $50 billion fabrication facility in Texas has faced massive delays after pivoting from 4-nanometer to 2-nanometer production mid-construction. They had no anchor customer until Tesla recently signed a $16.5 billion deal running through 2033, but production won't start until 2028. Apple is rumored to launch an 18.8-inch foldable MacBook or iPad in 2026 or 2027, but Huawei beat them to market by 2 full years. Microsoft lost its Windows license with Huawei in March 2025, losing an entire product segment to Harmony OS. Richard Yu stated that all new Huawei smartphones and tablets launched in 2025 will ship with native Harmony OS. He emphasized that Harmony OS compressed a decade of foreign operating system development into just 1 year. Huawei spends around 10 billion yuan annually, roughly $1.4 billion, to support developers migrating to the Harmony OS ecosystem. The company invested 10,000 engineers annually for over 6 years, producing 130 million lines of code. Yu emphasized that Harmony OS aims to break the Android-iOS duopoly, not just in China, but globally. He stated the company's goal is reaching tens of millions of users faster than the initial 10 million milestone. Analysts predict Harmony OS could surpass Android's market share in China by 2028 to 2030 if current trends continue. The MateBook Fold Ultimate design represents more than just a foldable tablet. It's proof that when you're forced to innovate, when you're backed into a corner with no other options, you either collapse or you build something revolutionary. Huawei chose to build. And what they've built is a complete alternative to the entire Western technology stack. From chips to operating systems to applications to connectivity standards, it's all independent, all Chinese developed, and honestly, it's all working. Act 4. The Display Revolution. Huawei just dropped, another bombshell. A smartphone with an 8,000 nit display. That's the brightest smartphone screen ever created, nearly 3 times brighter than most flagship phones available in 2025. The United States spent years trying to destroy Huawei's ability to manufacture phones like this through the most aggressive technology sanctions in modern history. It didn't work. The Mate 80 series just launched with 4 different models, and we need to understand how this happened and what it means. The base Mate 80 starts at 4,799 yuan, approximately $660. That's your entry flagship with a 6.75-inch display and the Kirin 9020 chipset. Move up to the Mate 80 Pro, and you're looking at 5,999 to 7,999 yuan, about $825 to $1,100, with the same 6.75-inch screen, but a superior Kirin 9030 processor in the 12GB RAM configurations. The Mate 80 Pro Max is the super flagship at 7,999 to 8,999 yuan. Roughly $1,100 to $1,240. This model jumps to a 6.9-inch OLED display with 16 gigabytes of RAM and the Kirin 9030 Pro chipset. Then there's the Mate 80 RS Ultimate design, the luxury version priced at 11,999 to 12,999 yuan, approximately $1,650 to $1,790. It's the first Mate or P series phone ever to pack 20 gigabytes of RAM. That's the highest memory configuration Huawei has ever offered in a flagship device. Now, about that 8,000 nit brightness. Most flagship phones currently available hit somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 nits at peak brightness. The Mate 80 series nearly triples that ceiling. You can use this phone in direct desert sunlight at noon and still read the screen clearly. This isn't just about bragging rights. High brightness enables better HDR performance, improved outdoor visibility, and superior camera viewfinding in bright conditions. It's a genuine user experience advantage, not a spec sheet gimmick. The Mate 80 series proves something critical. American sanctions didn't stop Chinese technological advancement. They accelerated it. Closing? The new reality. So where does this leave Japan? Tokyo imposed the strictest semiconductor export controls in the Western alliance, thinking they'd slow China's technological rise. Instead, they've triggered a resource war they cannot win. China controls the rare earth elements Japan's industries desperately need. Beijing can turn the supply tap on and off at will, rewarding cooperative nations and pressuring adversaries. Japan's automotive sector, electronics manufacturers, and defense contractors all depend on materials that ultimately come from Chinese mines and processing facilities. Japan's diversification efforts, partnerships with Australia, investments in recycling, joint programs with the United States, help at the margins. They cannot replace China's overwhelming dominance in rare earth processing. Not in 5 years, probably not in 10. Meanwhile, China isn't just responding to sanctions, they're building complete technological independence. Harmony OS demonstrates that China can create viable alternatives to Western platforms. The Mate 80 series proves they can manufacture cutting-edge hardware despite the most aggressive export controls ever imposed. The semiconductor war that Japan joined alongside the United States was supposed to contain China's technological ambitions. Instead, it's accelerating Beijing's drive towards self-sufficiency while exposing Japan's critical vulnerabilities. Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Japan's industrial champions, now face a future where their most essential materials are controlled by a geopolitical rival they just sanctioned. This is the new reality of technological competition in the 21st century. Control over resources matters more than advanced manufacturing. Supply chain resilience beats cutting-edge innovation, and sanctions, rather than containing rivals, often force them to become more dangerous competitors. Japan bet everything on slowing China down. They might have just guaranteed their own decline instead. The question now isn't whether China will retaliate. It's how much pain Beijing is willing to inflict, and whether Japan's industries can survive the answer.